Hi, I'm Adeline Willis, but I go by Addy, and I was diagnosed with bowel cancer in August 2019. And it was quite a shock, I can tell you. So what happened and how did I get diagnosed? So a friend of mine said to me once, give me the PowerPoint highlights, not the Excel details. But I'm going to give you the Excel details because I think it's important that people understand what is normal and what isn't normal and when to get checked out. So I started a new job in the March of 2019 and it was quite stressful, new job, nerves, that kind of thing. And my digestive system wasn't really very happy. Some days I wouldn't go to the loo at all. Some days I felt like I was constantly on the toilet or had very loose movements. Some days I had what I call poo cystitis. I would sit down, go to the loo, stand up and feel like I needed to go again straight away. And none of this was particularly normal behaviour for me. But I didn't think too much of it because I just started a new job and I thought I had stress. I had suffered with irritable bowel syndrome before in my life and I just kind of put it down to that. But a few weeks into the job, it wasn't really getting any better. A few more weeks later, still sort of up and down. So I thought, right, this really isn't normal. I should get this checked out. So I went to my GP and pre-COVID this was, but getting a GP appointment still took a couple of weeks. So I went to see the GP and she suggested a blood test and a stool sample, which I then booked and dropped in, etc. And I went back a few weeks later for the results. The blood test was absolutely clear, but there were what she called inflammatory markers in the stool sample. But she said the next thing is to have a colonoscopy. So I actually was lucky. I had private medical insurance. So I said, well, let's use that. And I booked to go and see a gastroenterologist locally at my local private hospital. But again, holidays, my holidays, his holidays, etc. It took a little while to get an appointment booked. So I went to see him. And I think we were now in the July of 2019. He said, your GP's fantastic. She's done everything I would have done. So we can just go straight and book a colonoscopy. So that's what we did. We had that booked for August. Colonoscopies aren't fun. Mainly the bit, not the actual colonoscopy part, but the prep beforehand, because you have to empty your entire digestive system. So you have to eat fairly bland food for a couple of days, and then the day before you have to drink this horrible liquid, usually half a litre of it about 4 hours apart, and it completely clears you out. And if you're ever prepping for that, just plan a complete working from home day and going nowhere day, because you really don't want to be too far away from the bathroom. Anyway, so next day, I went off to the hospital for a colonoscopy. I was actually a hospital quite far away from where I live. It was about a 45-minute drive. So my dad, bless him, offered to drive me because you can't drive yourself home from a colonoscopy if you're going to have a sedation. So I went into the hospital, I had the colonoscopy, and I was quite dopey during the procedure. I was sort of floating in and out of consciousness. And I sort of woke up and I remember looking up at the screen and seeing the camera going through my intestines and thought, oh, that's fine. Falling back asleep again, waking up again and seeing something really weird on the screen, like a big black mark, and thinking, oh, that's a bit odd, and falling asleep again. And then I woke up again and it looked like a squid inking on the screen. And I realized they were tattooing me inside. I couldn't feel anything, but they were tattooing the top and the bottom. And it was then I knew that I'd got something in my bowel. Fell asleep again and I woke up in the recovery room, and the gastroenterologist doctor came round to see me and said, I'm sorry to wake you up whilst you're asleep, but you need to go and have I think it was a CT scan and a ultrasound. He said, I didn't want you to wake up in the scanner and be really confused about where you were. And I said to him, you found something, haven't you? And he said, yes. And I said, it's cancer, isn't it? And he said, yes, I think so. And even 4 years later, it's still really hard to say that, because no one wants to hear those words. No one wants to know. But the worst thing is not knowing and thinking you might have it. So he said, yes, I think so. And the reason why he said I think so is because doctors never like to make a guess. But he's a very tenured gastroenterologist, and I'm sure he's seen many, many tumours over the years. So that day I went down, I was still in the hospital, so he arranged for me to have an emergency CT scan and an emergency ultrasound. So I went off. My poor old dad came up to see me. I said, oh, Dad, I've got to have another couple of tests. So wander off to Tesco's or the cafeteria or something, grab yourself a sandwich and come back in a couple of hours. So off I went for my scan, my ultrasound, and I was back in my room, and my doctor came to see me, and he said, oh, you've had the CT scan? I said, yes. He said, oh, you need the ultrasound still? I said, no, I've had that. I said, my liver's fine. And I could see the wave of relief going up the doctor's face. And I said, what's the significance of that? I said, I don't drink that much. And he said, we're not, and he had this sort of smile, and he said, we're not testing your liver for alcohol, for cirrhosis. He said, we're testing it because bowel cancers, if they're going to metastasize, which means spread, their primary place they like to go to first is your liver. So if it's not in your liver, there is an excellent chance it's not anywhere else, but we will need to wait for the results of the CT scan. So I was slightly relieved that the cancer probably hadn't spread, definitely not to my liver, but probably not anywhere else, but we still need to wait for the results. So my dad came up and helped me downstairs and out to the car, and got in the car, and he was like, oh, what was all the extra tests? I said, oh, they just needed to check a couple of things. And I just thought, I remember sitting next to him and thought, I can't tell him in the car driving home. It's not fair. And besides, I don't think it really sunk in to myself yet. And I needed to go home and digest the news. And also I needed to know exactly how bad it was. So I went home, my dad dropped me back. I helped my husband put the kids to bed, and I sat down with my husband. He said, so how did the test go? And I just burst into tears and told him I'd got cancer. And the look of utter horror and shock on his face, it was just, I don't think I'll ever forget that. But after the initial shock and the tears and quite a few tissues, we sat down and had a chat, and I explained what had happened and about the extra tests that I'd had, and that hopefully it hadn't spread anywhere because the ultrasound on my liver was clear, and told him the thing about the drinking, and he did have a bit of a laugh. But I had to wait to go and see a colorectal surgeon. My gastroenterologist had referred me on to somebody else. But what happened next was the worst 2 weeks of my life, because I knew I had cancer, but I didn't know how bad it was. I didn't know where it was. I didn't know my prognosis. I didn't know a treatment plan. I didn't know anything. And so I did what almost every other human being will do in that period. I just got on with life and buried every feeling and emotion that I had, because I just thought, if I give in to this utter terror, I'm going to give in completely. I did tell my work the next day, but only my two managers. I didn't want to tell anyone else. The reason why I also told them was because I was off sick the next day, because quite honestly, I didn't feel like going to work. I was still in quite a lot of discomfort after the colonoscopy, and I'd just been told I'd got cancer. So I thought, actually, I'm going to have a bit of a duvet day today. I did allow myself a duvet day. So 2 weeks later, my husband and I went to see the colorectal surgeon, and I don't think he knew that I already knew that I had cancer, because I just sat down and he told me that I'd got stage 3 bowel cancer, specifically rectal cancer. And it was, I think it says T3AB is the way they classify the tumours. So stage 1 is the earliest stage of cancer and stage 4 is the last stage of cancer. So there's 4 stages. T3 when it comes to bowel cancer is very treatable. T4 is also treatable. It doesn't mean if someone gets diagnosed with stage 4 cancer that it's terminal. It can mean that, but it doesn't definitely mean that. And the reason why I'm explaining that is if you ever get a diagnosis or somebody else does, you shouldn't jump to conclusions about what that might mean for your future. Anyway, the colorectal surgeon explained to me what was going on and where the tumour was and what they thought the treatment path might be, and that I should go and see an oncologist. I think he wanted me to have I had an extra scan that day actually when I went to see him. I had an MRI scan because they were concerned that where the tumour was sitting, that it was lying on my uterus and they couldn't tell whether or not the uterus had also been impacted by the cancer. So I had an extra MRI scan that day. And he actually booked me an appointment the next evening to see an oncologist, which was great because, again, I didn't want to wait any longer. And I remember at the end of like a 50-minute meeting, I'd been asking him lots of questions. And he looked at my husband and he said, "Is she always this practical?" Because again, I don't think he realised that I already knew that I had cancer walking into the meeting, and what I needed was details and answers. And my husband, Andy, looked at me and looked at him and went, "Yes, but don't worry about it. She'll fall apart later." And we had a bit of a giggle. Anyway, moving on, the next day I went to see the oncologist, and the oncologist was very positive about the placement of the tumour and the treatment plan, and said that he thought a treatment plan of radiotherapy and chemotherapy together for 5.5 weeks would reduce the tumour significantly. And then I would have to wait 2 months and have more scans to see how the tumour had reacted to the treatment. And then post that, would have to decide whether or not I needed surgery to either remove anything that was left of the tumour, or even if it had completely gone, to remove the area that the tumour was in. Bowel cancer is the 4th most prevalent cancer, but it's the 2nd biggest killer of all the cancers. And the reason being is because most people don't know they've got it. And by the time they find out they've got it, it's spread already to other parts of their body, which is why it's the 2nd biggest killer. In my case, because it was T3, I was lucky. I caught it just about early enough before it had started spreading. There was quite a lot of concern about whether or not the tumour had actually breached the bowel wall or had affected my uterus, but it turns out after all the tests that they were happy that it hadn't. So moving on to, so we're now in September 2019. I had 5.5 weeks of radiotherapy, which involved going to the hospital every day, having to make sure I had a bladder that was full between 300 and 450 millilitres. So having to have an ultrasound every morning to check how full my bladder was. And the reason why that is they use the bladder as a marker for the radiotherapy. So having to do bladder bingo every morning, which was always fun. It's either too full or not full enough, or sit and have a drink, or go for a pee, but only pee this much. Quite fun. As well as having 5 tablets twice a day for the chemotherapy, and anti-nausea tablets. Radiotherapy itself doesn't hurt at all. You're lying in a room. It's very much like having a CT scan. I think it took longer to position me on the table than it actually did to do the radiotherapy. And the radiotherapy itself lasted about 1 song. The reason why I know that is because they had a music player in the room, and it took about a song to position me and about a song to do the treatment, and then as quick as I could get dressed and get out. So about an hour round trip most days to do that. And I continued working. I worked from home. Instead of 2 days a week, I did 3 days a week at home, and then I commuted into the office 2 days a week. And I worked all the way through my treatment. I did get more tired as the time went on, and I did have to be careful to moisturise. I had to use I think it was called Simple, like a very clean and no perfume moisturizer, pretty much from my bra strap to my knees, because that was the area they were doing the radiotherapy. And I had to moisturize my hands and my feet twice a day because of the chemotherapy. One of the side effects of the chemotherapy is you can get really dry and cracked skin on your extremities, and it's really important that they don't crack and they don't get infected. So that was pretty much mid-September all the way through to the end of October. And then November and December was a waiting game, basically recovering from the radio and chemotherapy. And aside from being really tired, I was absolutely fine. I didn't really have any other side effects. I mean, I had nausea when I was having the actual chemotherapy, but I took anti-nausea tablets. Oh, I forgot the white diet. They put me on a white diet, which got nicknamed the shite diet. I was allowed no fibre at all. It was what the colorectal surgeon put me on when I saw him in the August. I wasn't allowed any fruit or veg apart from one peeled piece of fruit a day. So they recommended tinned peaches. I wasn't allowed any vegetables at all that were raw. I was allowed one peeled root vegetable, so basically really soft carrot a day, just one a day. I wasn't allowed any brown anything, so everything had to be white, so white rice, white pasta, white bread. I was allowed eggs and white fish and chicken, but no red meat. So you can see what I mean by the white diet. It was really bland. I was also allowed potatoes in any way, shape or form, apart from with skin on them. So, and I was allowed white biscuits. So I was allowed custard creams and shortbread biscuit. And I was really complaining about this because it's quite hard to find in the Liverpool Street area a white sandwich with no red meat in it and no vegetables. So I ended up finding Tesco's did an egg mayonnaise sandwich with nothing in it. So my lunch when I went to the office was an egg mayonnaise sandwich, a bottle of Ribena, and a bag of Monster Munch, because that was all I was allowed. And it turns out I quite like fruit and veg, and I really missed it. But one of my colleagues went, I don't understand your problem here. You're basically allowed to eat chips and chocolate. I was like, yeah, sure, it sounds like the ideal diet to me. But anyway, it got a bit boring, but after a while, I got used to it. So fast forward now, we're in January 2020, and I went for some scans, and my oncologist was very pleased. He said the tumour had responded very well to the treatment. I said to him, well, I'm not sure the tumour would agree, but that's great. He said, what you need now is to book in for a sigmoidoscopy with your colorectal surgeon, because we can only tell so much from the outside. We need to check what's going on in the inside. Now, sigmoidoscopy is a lot quicker than a colonoscopy. It's a lot quicker at prep. So you can just rock up to the hospital in the morning, take a drink, have a quick clear out, and then you can go and have the test. So that was fine. Unfortunately, he could still see something. We couldn't see what it was. It looked like a sort of spider's nest. He said, there's still something there, but we don't know what it is. And we could biopsy it, but probably not any point, because it's a bit like taking the head of a spot off. You don't really know what's underneath it. So I said, okay, well, the decision was, if there's anything left, take it out. And that's the decision made. There's something left. So cut it out, cut it up, and see what it is. So I booked in for surgery, which was the week after half term in February 2020. And I went in for a bowel resection, which is basically cutting out the part of my bowel that had the tumour, so my upper rectal passage. Your rectum is actually about 20 centimetres long, and its job is to compact your faeces before you've got enough there ready to expel it out of your body. So I had the surgery. I think it was a Wednesday, and yeah, I mean, the surgery went fine. It went well. I woke up. I felt quite bruised and battered afterwards. I mean, I had major surgery. I had 3 keyhole holes in my stomach, and then a scar from my belly button down a couple of inches. But the surgeons came round and saw me that evening and the next day and said they were very pleased. And actually, they let me out of the hospital on the Saturday, because I was recovering so well. So I went home and then spent the next few weeks recovering from the surgery. and went back to get the test results, and my surgeon confirmed that there was still cancer left in that area, and it was still there. So I'd made the right decision to have the surgery, because it would have come back. The likelihood of bowel cancer returning is highest within the first 2 years. So I was really pleased I'd made the decision to have the surgery. After the surgery, my oncologist recommended a full course of chemotherapy. And what I mean by that is the course that I'd had with the radiotherapy was only 3/4 of the chemo medicine. So this time I was going to have 100%. So it was going to be in 3-week cycles, 2 weeks on, 1 week off, for 4 cycles. But we're now in April 2020, and the world was a very different place. So I had to fight pretty hard to actually have the chemotherapy. And you're probably asking, why do I need chemo? I'd had it before and they'd cut out what was left of the tumour, but they're never sure whether or not one rogue cell has gone walkabout in your body when they cut into you to cut out a cancerous area, which is why they recommend chemo afterwards. So I had the chemo. I do remember having to phone up the hospital when I was going to get the meds, and you'd call them when you were outside, and because we're now in full-blown COVID and lockdown, and they would come out of the hospital and I'd have to wind down the passenger window of my car, and they would drop the drugs through my through the front window, and I'd drive off. I do remember that, thinking that was quite strange, but okay. So the chemo was 5 tablets again, twice daily, 12 hours apart, half an hour after you eat, and 2 weeks on, 1 week off for 12 weeks. And I have to admit, this one was pretty brutal. That extra 25% really made a difference. I was quite nauseous, very lethargic, and my energy levels throughout the 2 weeks that I was on it definitely dropped a lot. And then I'd have a week off and my energy would come back again, but not all the way. And then it would go back down again. So by the end of the 3 months, I was pretty tired. But tired and a bit nauseous. Otherwise, I was okay. I didn't lose my hair, which is what most people associate with chemo. And after that, I went back to see the oncologist, and he was very happy with the way I was doing. And I moved on to quarterly checkups, one with him, and then 3 months later with the surgeon, and vice versa for another year. So continued doing that. No reoccurrence of the cancer as far as they could tell, which was great. So the tests involved having a CT scan with contrast every 3 months. And then we get through to August, where are we now? 19, 20, 21, August 21. So that's 2 years post being diagnosed. And everyone's very happy with me. So I've moved to yearly checkups now. So I had my last one in August 2022, and still no reoccurrence of cancer. And I'm due one in a month's time. And that will be my 4-year cancerversary. I'm almost at the magic 5 years, which will be next year. I find it slightly odd that they count cancer years from the day they diagnosed you, not the day they stopped treating you. But hey, that's the way it works. So I'm nearly at 4 years with no reoccurrence, which is excellent. And if I get to 5 years, which I'm fingers crossed, there's no reason why I shouldn't, I will officially be in remission. And then I'll probably go to every other year checks until I get to the 10-year checkup. At some point, I'll need another colonoscopy just to check that things are all where they should be. So side effects. Now I'm absolutely fine, except for I have half a rectum, which means I go to the loo more often than most people. It's not too bad. You just have to pay attention to your bodily functions and make sure you know where you are. It's a bit like going out with a toddler, always checking where toilets are. I have a radar key, so I can use disabled toilets. I was very lucky. I didn't need a stoma after the surgery. So that is a blessing. Not that there's anything wrong with the stoma, but it's nice not to have had to have one. I might be going into too much information for people on this video, but if you're a woman of a certain age, or if you've had children, you know that that's just a fact of life. So that's my cancer story. And I think the reason why I want to tell it is because I was 41 when I was diagnosed with bowel cancer, which is incredibly rare. Only 2,500 people a year at that point in time were ever diagnosed with bowel cancer under the age of 50. That's 0.004% of the population. So getting my GP to think that I might have cancer and to push me through for the tests, in my case, wasn't particularly difficult. She was an excellent GP, but it's not on the forefront of most GPs' minds if you're under 50 when you've got digestive issues. They don't automatically think of the patient might have cancer and to get you checked out. Now, actually, because of my diagnosis, my doctor, when I saw her again later for something else, said, I had another patient come through who was also under 50, and I wasn't happy how they were presenting. So I sent them for a colonoscopy, and actually you've saved his life, because I wouldn't have thought about it otherwise. And he had a tumour and we caught it early, and he's going to be absolutely fine. And actually, my brother and sister were tested off the back of my diagnosis because it's so unusual in a patient of my age. And my brother was diagnosed with bowel cancer too, under the age of 50. And it's not hereditary. Well, at least not how they panel test it now. They might find another gene marker later, but I saved my brother's life too. So the reason why I wanted to share my story with you today is to demystify cancer, and bowel cancer specifically, but also to tell you that if you're concerned with anything in your body, be it breasts, testicles, bowel, skin, go to your doctor, go get checked out. And if you're unsure or not happy with the response, go back, go see a different doctor. If you have private medical insurance, use it. Keep going if things aren't right or you think something's not usual for you, and just keep going until you get the all clear, because it's your body, it's your life, and you know it best. So please, if there's anything that's not quite right, go get checked.